611. It's been a while, I muttered, staring at the window of the carriage as I stared at the familiar outer scenery. Although I said that, it wasn't actually a long time since I had last seen the academy. In fact, it had barely been a week. But it just felt like it had been forever. Remember, try your best not to reveal anything about your identity. Your goal here is to enter the crack and enter the mirror dimension. I know, I didn't need to be reminded by Noel. In fact, he had been reminding me of the same thing over and over again. Was I that untrustworthy? No, rather than him not trusting me, it's more like he's extremely paranoid. Indeed, he didn't want to go through it all over again. I understood, and so, without a word, I closed my eyes as the carriage rolled forward. Although I tried my best to remain calm, I had a hard time remaining so as my thoughts continued to drift to the academy. What would happen if I met her? What about them? Would they recognize me? Realistically, it shouldn't have been possible. Noel had personally taken steps to hide my face. But could he really keep it hidden from them? Perhaps in the past, but the current him. We're here. The carriage came to a gentle stop, and the door creaked open. Noel stepped out first, sunlight spilling in. He then turned around and looked at me. Are you ready? I am. I nodded in silence while similarly stepping out, allowing for the glow of the sun to fully bathe me. Then, turning my head, I saw the all too familiar academy gates. I felt my chest squeeze at the sight as I followed, Aldrich, from behind, several attendants following suit. And soon, arriving before the academy gates, a figure appeared. The moment she appeared, it was as if the air had been sucked from my lungs, leaving me utterly breathless. With her soft black hair dancing in the wind and cold eyes, she arrived before all of us, her stunning appearance gathering the attention of the few around. My mind blanked at the sight of her. But at the same time, my heart ached. Thank you for coming, she greeted Aldrich first, barely glancing in our direction. Her eyes met mine for the briefest moment before moving on, offering the same fleeting look to the others. So she didn't see through the disguise. A part of me was happy with the development, but at the same time, I felt lost. As I looked at her, taking in that familiar cold expression of hers, a thought crept into my mind: why does she still look the same? She looked no different than before. It was almost as though my death had not affected her at all. I obviously knew that that was probably not the case, but what if? What if she truly did not care? Thinking back on the way she had looked at me before, my lips quivered faintly. That might truly be the case. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The pain in my chest intensified as the thought crept up in my mind, and in that moment, I had no choice but to do it. I shut down all my emotions. Gone. This pain. I couldn't take it. Puff. Smoke drifted within the confines of a large common room. With her eyes carelessly drifting across the smoke, Kira raised her hand and twirled the smoke around her finger. She sat there like that, her eyes lost in a daze, until a certain voice broke out of it. Kira. Kira's brows furrowed slightly. It was that annoying voice. Kira, I heard you the first time. Kira tore her eyes away from the smoke, her gaze settling on Aoife. At a glance, she seemed normal, but the faint dark circles under her eyes were hard to miss. News of Julian's death had been kept a secret from most, but they knew. Aoife had been the first one to break it down to them. As the princess of the empire, she was naturally filled in on the information. She had been instructed to keep it to herself, but Aoife, true to her noisy personality, shared it with the others, insisting they tell no one. The news naturally came as a shock to everyone. However, the shock merely lasted for a few seconds before everyone dismissed the news. This hadn't been the first time Julian had disappeared or died. But he didn't disappear this time. His body was found without a heartbeat or breath. Still, that wasn't enough for them. Julian was a cockroach. He wasn't the type to die so randomly and abruptly. He couldn't die like that. But then, they all saw Leon. The one man who had never truly shown his emotions was finally showing signs of weakness, from his haggard face to the distant, lost look in his eyes. And that was when it truly hit them. Julian. He was really dead. Classes are about to start soon. Are you going to skip? Probably. Kira replied absent-mindedly, her attention drifting back to the smoke curling in the air. Honestly, the term was nearly over, and finals were just around the corner. At this point, classes felt pointless. They were more self-review sessions than anything. Plus, she also knew how to study on her own now. She had learned from Puff. Kira took another drag of her cigarette as Aoife stared at her with a worried look. She was just about to say something when a presence behind her made her pause. "What are you two doing?" It was Evelyn. Taking a look at her and seeing her pale face, Aoife knew it was mostly due to Leon. He had yet to leave his room following the news of Julian's death. He barely ate as well. Aoife took a deep breath while giving her a brief rundown on the situation. "I was asking if Kira wanted to come to class. She doesn't want to." "Oh, I see." Evelyn appeared to understand as her eyes lowered. Although she wasn't extremely close to Julian due to her aversion towards him in the past, she had recently gotten on better terms with him. News of his death did hit her, but it had yet to truly sink in. But more than anything, the one to have been hit the hardest was Leon. He had completely shut down, lost in a cycle of self-blame, muttering things like, "It's my fault. I caused this. If only I were better," over and over again. Regardless of what she said, he wouldn't listen as he fell deeper and deeper into this cycle of self-blame. He had truly been hit the hardest by Julian's death. And surprisingly, so did Kalian and Keys. The two of them appeared to have also been affected by Julian's death. This took everyone by surprise. Especially considering how their relationship was at the start. Since when did they become so close? A strange silence filled the room as the three girls stood lost in their thoughts. That was until, well, Aoife broke the silence as she dropped her books and notes on the nearby table and sat down. "Since none of you are going to class, I guess I'll study here." "Fuck that." Kira flicked the cigarette away. "I'd rather be left to study on my own. One of the reasons why I'm not going to class is because then I wouldn't have to see your face. So it would make me happy if you just, you know." Kira paused, doing a shooing motion with her hand. Aoife's face twitched. "You do know this is a common room, right?" "I do." "Then, doesn't really change how I feel." Kira cut Aoife off again as she sat up, brushing off her clothes. Crushing the cigarette under her foot, she moved toward Aoife, a clear scowl on her face. "You so much as make a single noise and I'll kill you." "Fa, the hell?" Aoife looked at Kira with an aggrieved look while mumbling things like, "Where's the respect? I'm a goddamn princess. Why are you speaking to me like this?" Overhearing her mumbling, Kira stopped, and Aoife's mouth quickly shut. Kira smirked then, "Pussy." She then proceeded to sit down opposite her. Staring at their interactions, Evelyn blinked her eyes slowly. It wasn't that long since Julian died. Evelyn half expected the two of them to be more affected, but apart from the occasional moments of silence, they seemed to be faring well. As if noticing the strange expression on her face, Kira turned to look her way. "What's wrong?" "No, it's, You think that I'm acting too normal after the news?" Evelyn's mouth squeezed into an X. Her thoughts had been read perfectly. Kira chuckled when she saw that, as she went on to grab a nearby book before opening it. "Do you know what he told me before?" Kira mumbled, her eyes moving towards the pages of the book. Both Aoife and Evelyn looked at her as she closed her eyes and recalled a certain conversation in the past. "Life doesn't pause for us. It moves forward, relentlessly. Just as we should. It's about honoring what was while making room for what could be. That's how someone grows." The two of them stared at Kira in silence as she continued. "I didn't really understand the words at first, but now I do." Kira pursed her lips. "There's a time and place for everything, but life doesn't wait for me, or for anyone. I can't keep standing in the same spot, stuck in the past. I had just recently taken my first step away from the starting line, and I can't go back to where I was before." She had spent too much time on that line. It was only recently that she managed to move past that line. And it was all thanks to him. And it was also for that reason that she didn't fall back to where she was before. Because she had grown past that point. Bang! A sudden crashing sound startled everyone as all heads raised towards the stairs, where a figure stumbled down. Leon. Evelyn and the others immediately grew startled as they saw him barely hanging onto the handrail. Just as they were about to move to him, they saw him raise his head, his eyes bloodshot. His lips quivered, his instincts kicking him. I can't be wrong. 612. The plan was relatively simple. While Aldrich distracted Delilah, I would take the chance to sneak into the academy mirror crack. Well, it sounds simple, but executing something like this is extremely difficult. Thankfully, it's not entirely impossible. But it'll all depend on him. Still, it was incredibly difficult. How easy could it be to move away from Delilah undetected? I was already glad that she didn't notice a thing, considering how close we were. It was a good thing that Noel wasn't just any regular person. I massaged my face. He completely changed the structure of my face. Though I had my doubts, it clearly worked to perfection, with not even one of the most powerful people in the world noticing. Ellipsis. I felt that it was a little bit of a pity, but I had a mission to accomplish. I couldn't let myself fall for any distractions. Thinking this far, I scratched the back of my head. But just as I did, I saw a pair of eyes immediately lock in my direction as my entire body stiffened. Slowly turning my head, our eyes met, and I suddenly felt like my entire body had been submerged into the deepest waters. I immediately grew alert. Why is she staring at me? Did she notice something? That shouldn't be possible, or is she now strong enough to detect something like this? All sorts of thoughts rambled in my mind at that moment as I struggled to maintain my composure. Her gaze felt suffocating, and I felt like I couldn't move at all. However, at the same time, staring at her, I felt nothing. I had sealed all the pain away, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. This seemed to reflect outwardly as eventually, her eyes drifted away from me and onto Aldrich. Who are they? Finally, for the first time, she asked about us. I slowly turned my attention towards Noel, who looked completely unfazed by her question as he raised his brow. They're my retainers. I need them to accompany me so that no incidents occur. Incidents? Why would? My son thought the same before he suddenly died. There's no guarantee that something won't happen. Even if you're here. After all, you were there, weren't you? Delilah's face didn't change upon hearing the words. However, staring at her, I could feel something about her change. She eventually closed her eyes and moved forward. I understand. Delilah didn't say anything more and just continued ahead. I traced her back with my eyes, and the locks in my heart started to shake. For some reason, her back, it felt extremely small. I quietly pursed my lips and let out a breath, calming down the locks on my emotions before focusing them mostly on two specific emotions, leaving the others untouched. Leaving that aside, I held onto my arms while staring at Noel. Thinking about how he had previously referred to me as son, I started to feel shivers run down my body. Goosebumps. I was feeling goosebumps. No, more importantly, I forgot to ask him about how he ended up becoming Aldrich. Don't tell me he actually. My stomach twisted as I looked at my hands. If that's truly the case, doesn't it mean that I've possessed the body of my own nephew? I felt like throwing up. However, after a little bit of thought, I denied the possibility. I knew Noel well enough to know he wasn't the type of person to do something like that. There was more to the story that he didn't let out. Or at least, I hoped that was the case. Looking in Noel's direction with a complicated look, I could only follow from behind in silence. There were mainly two reasons why we were currently at the academy. First, it was to officially recognize Julian as dead, and thus have him put off the year list, and secondly, it was to visit Linus. He was still unaware of the news. These were the two reasons for our visit on the surface. The real reason was already obvious, and as we made our way into the academy, Aldrich stopped and looked in my direction. I think this should be far enough. I'll go handle the paperwork. You go inform Linus that I'm currently at the academy. Tell him I'll be coming to visit him soon. Understood. I nodded quietly before glancing briefly in Delilah's direction. She didn't even spare me a glance as she looked at Aldrich. Then, staring at her one last time, I slowly turned away and headed towards the dorm buildings. Following me from behind were the other retainers. In that moment, the locks in my heart shattered, and the pain returned. But even so, I didn't look back while marching ahead. Single quote. I'll definitely make it up to her. Single quote. I promise. At the same time, near the dorms. What did you say? The girls were staring at Leon with incredulous, almost worried expressions. Taking a look at his pale face and seeing how bloodshot his eyes were, it was hard to not be worried about him. This was especially after hearing his words. I can. Leon tried to help himself up, but struggled to do so. It was only after Evelyn helped him that Leon managed to compose himself. Leon, what is up with you? She had a worried expression as she looked at him. Not only was he entirely pale, but he also looked quite weak. When was the last time he had eaten something? Evelyn was just about to speak again when she suddenly saw Leon raise his head and stare in a certain direction. Every hair on his body rose as he let go of her and moved forward. He could feel it now more than ever. His instincts told him that he was here. Or at least, Leon hoped that'd be the case. However, at the same time, he didn't hold much hope. He had witnessed Julian's death firsthand. Leon knew that he was dead. And yet, for some reason, he still hoped. He hoped that the sensation he was feeling wasn't just his imagination. Over the past few days, he had been blaming himself for Julian's death. Not because he wasn't there to help him when it mattered the most, but because he knew that nothing would have changed had he been there. He was a failure of a knight, and that was what hurt him the most. The fact that he failed to do the one job he was supposed to do. And I've even managed to make so much progress. Why? How did this happen? Even now, he didn't know who the culprit was. Nobody told him a thing. They all told him the same thing over and over again. Get better. Single quote. There's no point in you knowing. That's not something you can handle. The way they looked at him was all the same. They all thought the same thing. That he was a failure of a knight. That he was worthless. And the thing that hurt him the most was the fact that he couldn't disagree. He really had failed as a knight. Over there, with quivering lips, Leon moved towards the door, heading out as the sun bathed his entire body in warmth. Evelyn and the others followed him from behind, their expression worried. However, Leon ignored them. Right now, he was just following his instincts. Although they weren't reliable, they tended to be accurate. And soon, his eyes fell on a certain group. They were headed their way. Leon's gaze fell on them, and he recognized them immediately. They were those from the Evanis household. Why would they? Wait, looking at the insignia, they must be from the Evanis household. Why are they here? I heard that Julian had a brother. Could they be here for him? As Leon overheard the conversation behind him, his eyes locked onto a specific person. His gait was calm, and so was his face. However, looking at him, he looked completely different than the Julian he knew. His face was a lot thinner, and so was his skeletal structure. Thin, circular framed glasses rested on his nose, adding an almost scholarly air, but his eyes were the real difference. Sharp and unsettling, it almost felt like nothing could escape his eyes. Leon felt his entire body shiver at the sight of him. I've never seen this person before, and I've been in the Evanis household for very long. Could it be? Excuse me. Finally arriving before them, those of the Evanis household came to a stop. They looked at the four cadets in front of them before the man Leon was looking at stepped forward, his gaze directed towards Aoife as he bent over slightly. It is an honor to meet you, princess. The others followed suit as Aoife raised her hand. Quote. There's no need for that. I'm not a princess in the academy. If that is your wish. The man brought himself up before staring in the direction of the dorms. I've heard that the second young master is here. Could you perhaps help us find his room? Oh, sure. Aoife immediately nodded, looking at Evelyn and Kira before moving towards the entrance of the door, followed by the two of them. Leon. The only one who didn't enter was Leon, who kept his gaze directed towards the man from the Evanis household. The more he stared at him, the more he felt that something about him was off. But at the same time, he could tell that he wasn't wearing a disguise or hiding his features with some sort of illusion skill. Then, is there something wrong? Cocking his head, the man stared at Leon, a half-smile marring his features. Snapping his head, Leon gradually shook his head. No, I just don't recognize you. This is the first time that I've seen you. Who might you be? Me. The man smiled before shifting his attention to the dorm rooms. Quote. If you already know the answer, what's the point of asking? Leon blinked his eyes, his face changing. However, before he could say anything further, the man followed the girls into the dorm, his face displaying the same half-hearted smile. That was all he said, leaving Leon standing stunned. Eventually, Leon found himself mumbling. Is it 613? What's really going on? Is that really him? Leon's mind was a mess as he entered the common room to see him speaking with the other delegates of the Evanis household. Looking at him, he felt different compared to Julian. From the way he carried himself and spoke, he felt sharper, more refined, and at the same time, more vicious. He looked like a snake hiding his fangs, ready to strike at any given moment. Could that really be him? If I'm understanding things correctly, he should be here to relay the news to Linus about Julian's death. If it were Julian, why would he do something like that? Unless he had a different goal in mind. Linus doesn't seem to be here. Do you want to wait here? The girls were being quite polite with the guests from the Evanis household. Even the normally crazy Kira was mild as she made her way towards her own seat and started studying. It's all right. We don't have the time to wait. And then, eventually, his gaze fell on Leon. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like it if he accompanied me to look for Linus. Me. Leon was surprised at first, but then soon nodded his head, under the surprised looks of the girls. I'll do it. Wait, Leo, it's all right, I've recovered enough. But, Evelyn looked at Leon with a worried expression, but after seeing his expression, she decided to let him be. All right, who am I to tell you what to do? She, of all people, understood how Leon currently felt. She had no reason to stop him. In fact, this was probably a good thing. Having stayed in his own room for the past couple of days, getting some fresh air would be good for him. In the meantime, the man looked towards the Evanus vassals. You guys wait here in case Linus shows up. In the meantime, I'll go with him to see if we can find him around. This will save us some valuable time. Understood. The vassals were strangely obedient to this new man whom Leon found unfamiliar. This made him even more suspicious and made him want to figure things out even more. Something is definitely off about him. All right, let's go. Moving past Leon, the strange man headed out of the common room and out of the dormitory. Leon looked back behind him, staring at the vassals before heading out and following the man from behind. Stepping out of the building, he was met by the blinding glare of the sun. As he moved forward, he reached out toward the strange man. Wait, he called out, his breath a little heavy. With barely any food in his system and days of sleeplessness weighing on him, he struggled to keep up. The man finally stopped and looked in Leon's direction. What is it? No, Leon caught his breath before looking at him. The more he looked at him, the more foreign he looked, and yet, his instincts told him that it was him. Collecting his breath, Leon asked. I didn't catch your name. What did you say your name was? Me. The man blinked his eyes for a moment before adjusting his glasses. Lazarus. You can call me that. Lazarus. Leon raised his brow. What sort of name was that? This didn't sound like a common name or anything he had ever heard before. Even in my home country, the name is rather uncommon. But that is irrelevant for now. Let's go find Linus. Lazarus turned around and headed deeper into the academy. Leon followed him from behind, his mind wandering over the situation and everything that didn't add up. He had been so absorbed in his own thoughts that he didn't realize they were going the wrong way. By the time he realized, they were not far from the academy mirror crack. Wait, why are we here? This is the completely wrong direction. Linus. Leon's words were abruptly cut off by Lazarus, who stared off in the distance. So not only do you have a stupid face, but you're in fact stupid. I'm not stupid, Leon almost instinctively answered before he stopped himself. Then, slowly processing his words, his eyes shot up. See kid you, I don't know what you're talking about, but I do need your help. Lazarus pointed towards the cube-like building in the distance. I've heard that Linus is inside the mirror dimension. I'm sure a cadet of your caliber can help me get in to find him. Can you do that? Leon didn't know how to answer. His mind was blank. There was no way that Linus was inside the mirror dimension. The mirror dimension was still closed for the first years following the recent events. By now, he'd have to be stupid not to realize that something was up. He was very clearly aware that Lazarus could very well be Julian in disguise. But how was that possible? He had seen him die before his eyes. There was simply, so, are you going to help me? Leon pursed his lips, staring at the man in front of him with a complicated expression. If it was really him, why was he being so vague about it? No, more importantly, why did he not reveal his identity and come back to the academy? Leon had so many questions he wanted to ask, but held his tongue. If this was truly Julian, then, he definitely had a reason to do what he was doing. He knew him well enough to know that he wasn't the type to do things randomly. And so, after taking a deep breath, he nodded his head. All right, I'll help you out. Maybe this once, I'll be useful. Leon stepped forward and entered the distant building, offering a nod to the guard as Lazarus followed silently behind. Entering the building, he looked completely unfazed, as though he had been here many times before. This further heightened Leon's certainty of Lazarus's identity. The mirror crack at the academy was under heavy guard following recent events, with security tighter than ever. In fact, the structure had only been recently built in order to better safeguard the crack. Arriving before the crack, the two were immediately stopped. State your identities. Leon glanced at the guard before handing over his student ID. Leon Ellert. The guard's eyes widened in surprise the moment he saw the ID. Leon wasn't just any cadet. he was well known for his exceptional talent, and more recently, for being revealed as the Prince of the Verdant Empire. If it were him, then there was no problem letting him in. But there was an issue. Who was he? The guard turned his attention towards Lazarus. He's with me. He's one of the delegates from the Evanus household. I can vouch for him. Leon said while looking back at Lazarus. Quote. If you say so. Nonetheless, we still have to do some registering before allowing him in. This is for safety precautions. Leon looked behind to see Lazarus step forward with a confident stride. He then extended his hand. By all means. All right. The guard pulled out a small device and pressed it against Lazarus's arm. As a bright red light washed over it, Leon leaned in, studying the device with care. This device wasn't just any regular device. It was a type of scanner linked to a vast database, an advanced piece of technology recently developed by the Empire. All cadets had been registered within it. Its primary function was to detect disguises during identity verification, ensuring that no one could mask their true identity. It could also recognize anyone who had registered before. And Julian, he had already been scanned once. Leon pressed his lips into a thin line as he watched Lazarus undergo the scan. Would it detect something? Would it recognize him? Would. Check complete. You may enter. But it seemed like he had been overthinking. The check lasted a few seconds, and the result came out blank. Yeah, there's no way he wouldn't think of something like this. The check wasn't exactly foolproof, and there were ways around it. In the end, the two managed to enter the mirror crack without any problems, the air suddenly turning arid and dry as they stepped in. We're here. As they stepped into the familiar space, Leon glanced toward Lazarus, who had come to a halt, quietly surveying the safe zone. Then, with a faint, knowing smile, Lazarus turned his gaze to meet Leon's. Thank you for bringing me here. Oh, yeah, Leon nodded, his lips dry. He was curious as to why he had been brought here. He wanted to ask him if he was truly him. He had a lot of questions he wanted to ask, and yet, he couldn't find it in him to ask a single one. In the end, the only thing he could do was stare blankly as Lazarus stared in the direction of the outer walls of the safe zone. Eventually, his lips parted. Quote. I will be going on a long journey. Long journey. I don't know how long, but it's something that I have to do. I don't really have a choice. Leon could only listen in silence, his heart pressing. He could more or less tell what he was planning on doing. Quote. I will probably change a lot. By the time I come back, I might just be a completely different person. I'll have missed a lot of things. I didn't expect things to turn out this way, but in the end, this is what I must do. Slowly turning his attention towards Leon, Lazarus. No, Julian smiled. In that moment, Leon was sure. The man standing before him was Julian. You know, even though you are useless, my death had nothing to do with you. It was something that had to happen. What does that? Julian stepped closer, pressing his hand against Leon's shoulder. You're a prince now. You can't be stuck thinking about failing your job as a knight. There are more important things that you need to think about. In fact, I'm almost happy that I'm not with you. Things will probably get extremely troublesome if I were to stick with you. Lazarus's expression winced. In that moment, he truly looked like Julian, and a small laugh escaped Leon's lips. Quote. They'll not be that bad. In fact, if anything, sticking with Julian was the surefire way to guarantee trouble. He was a trouble magnet. I know they won't. Julian patted Leon on the shoulder as he mumbled. Don't resist, okay. Leon closed his eyes and nodded. Quote. All right. He understood exactly what Julian was about to do. And just before it happened, Leon took a deep breath and mumbled. I'm being fired, aren't I? Julian's hand paused before a laugh escaped his lips. You know it. Quote. Do I get any severance pay? With whose money? Yours. Fuck off. Julian clicked his tongue and mumbled, by firing you, I'm essentially giving away a lot of money, so be grateful. A faint white glow manifested over Julian's ring the moment Leon closed his eyes, and in that moment, the memories of the events that had occurred in the previous hour faded from Leon's mind. The last thing Leon recalled before everything faded was a few soft words. Goodbye, you failure of a knight. And with that, Leon forgot about everything. 614. It seems like the ring has worked. I stood in silence, watching as Leon blinked slowly, his eyes distant and unfocused. But it wasn't long before they snapped back to clarity. What? He glanced around, bewilderment written all over his face. With a furrowed brow, He scratched his head, clearly trying to make sense of how he'd ended up here. I could only smile at his antics before turning my attention away from him and onto the distant walls of the safe zone. The hard part was now done. Although Leon was probably going to figure something out, or at least get a clue, most of his memories had been erased. In the first place, I had revealed my identity to him so that he could help me get into the safe zone. I knew that the moment he figured something out, he'd help me out. He was just like that. But in the end, I still had to erase his memories. Alright, I shouldn't waste any more time. I looked around me before moving into one of the tents and activating Lament of Lies. Now that the hard part was done, all I needed to do was sneak out of the safe zone. Most of the heavy security was at the entrance of the crack, and with that part cleared, I could freely move out into the depths of the mirror dimension. Swoosh. The tent ballooned as I moved out, my gaze sorting through my surroundings before heading towards the exit of the safe station. As I moved, a couple of guards passed by me, my presence completely undetected. How is the situation outside? It's calmed down a bit. There are still several monsters trying to make their way in, but it's calmed down significantly. Niece, I can't wait to get some rest. Tell me about it. Overhearing the conversation, I sighed in relief. If there were monsters outside, then things would become rather problematic for me. However, that didn't seem to be the case. Then I should be able to sneak out without any problem. The safe zone had been built to keep monsters out, not to stop anyone from leaving. As a result, moving out of the safe zone was relatively easy. All I had to do was navigate through the guards, trying to keep my breath as minimal as possible. Was it perhaps because I had gotten in touch with the source before, or just because I had gotten stronger in general, but my control over Lament of Lies had gotten considerably better? None of the guards were able to detect a single thing, and before I knew it, I had stepped out of the safe zone. I looked at my surroundings and saw a barren land. The ground was cracked, and all sorts of pits appeared all around, with even chunks of metal and armor sprawled on the ground. Looks like the situation was a lot worse than I originally anticipated. Just with a glance and seeing how much blood had dried up on the ground, I could see why the academy had no choice but to send everyone out. It's a good thing I'm leaving when it's all over. Looking behind me and staring at the walls of the safe zone, I sighed to myself before turning away and heading deeper into the mirror dimension. There were a lot of complicated thoughts swirling in my mind, and in this very moment, I wanted to do nothing but forget about it, and as such, I ran. I ran until my breath was gone. That was when I stopped. And as I looked up, my vision grew red as a faint rustling sound echoed in the air. Rustle tilde. A blood-red leaf fell before me, and I smiled. It's been a while. Yes, it has. Human. It was none other than Almighty, whom I had not seen since I had returned from the Kasha. Oh, you're here. I guess I wasn't the only one pleased to see Almighty again as a black figure manifested before me, staring in Almighty's direction. Since when could it do that? It's also been a while, kitten. What did you call me? Is that not what you are? Pebble raised both of its paws as it thought about hitting Almighty, but then stopped itself when it realized this wasn't the same Almighty. It could only kick the ground and click its tongue. Just wait until I get a body. It looked at me, its gaze sharp. I could tell from its gaze that it was still mad at me. It couldn't be helped. Pebble had also thought I had died back then. This was the first time I had seen Pebble since the incident. I'm sure Pebble will get over it soon enough. I shifted my attention towards Almighty. For this journey, it was important that it came with me. The destination that I needed to go to was quite far, and without Almighty, it would be impossible for me to reach the place anytime soon. It was also going to be extremely dangerous, and without the ability to see visions or the future, I was now more vulnerable than ever. As such, I called for Almighty. Let's go. I can't afford to waste any more time. I extended my hand forward, and moments later, thick roots began to emerge from the ground. They slithered upward, twisting and curling around the earth before creeping along my limbs, wrapping around me. Soon, my vision grew dark. Almighty began to move then. That was the moment I stopped being Julian. From this moment forward, I became Lazarus. A traveling merchant from afar. At the same time, Delilah's office. The papers have been signed. You will receive a posthumous degree. I'll take it. Aldrich reached forward to grab the degree Delilah passed over. With this, Julian had now graduated from Haven. A year earlier, but he had now graduated. I take it that I can leave now, right? Aldrich stared at the degree for a brief moment before putting it away. Delilah sat on the opposite end, staring at him with her deep black eyes before slowly nodding her head. You may. Aldrich didn't waste a single second and stood up. He merely spared Delilah a glance before turning around and heading out. Clank. A tense silence followed after his departure. Delilah sat in her seat, her gaze lost and unfocused. It was unknown what her thoughts were as she just remained sitting without moving a single muscle. But that was until her communication device suddenly vibrated. TRRR. It was only then that she snapped out of it. Yes. She soon answered it. Chancellor, there's been a situation. A voice Delilah recognized rather quickly echoed from the communication device, prompting her to frown. A situation? Quote. Yes, there's been a situation. An unknown person, we believe to be from the Evanis household, has entered the mirror crack. He was accompanied by one of the cadets, Leon Ellert, before he suddenly vanished. When we questioned the cadet about the situation, he looked completely stunned. He doesn't seem to remember a single thing. Delilah's frown deepened as she heard the conversation. Her first thoughts were on the possibility of Leon being controlled by a spirit user. Only such means would explain the situation. This was the most obvious answer. However, as her mind focused on the Evanis household part, a little part of her prickled. Her lips soon parted. Bring the cadet to my office. Understood. Following her words, Leon was quickly brought into her office as he looked around with a lost expression. I don't really. Delilah raised her hand. It's fine. I don't blame you. I wasn't able to notice a thing either, so the fault partially lies with me. Indeed, if the one responsible was from the Evanis household, then they had somehow managed to slip away from her detection. But even then, she didn't notice anyone strong enough to be able to control Leon like that. The strongest appeared to be at around tier 6. Even Viscount Evanis wasn't very strong. He was just around tier 4 to tier 5. It almost made her surprised to see, considering how talented Julian had been. Delilah closed her eyes and beckoned Leon forward. Come. Though confused, Leon complied and took a step forward. He was just about to open his mouth to speak when Delilah's hand reached for his head, and he instantly blanked. Quote. What Delilah was currently doing was simple. She was trying to see and detect if there were any traces of spirit magic within Leon's mind. This was so that she could determine how the situation had unfolded. But just as she tried to sense something, quote. Delilah stopped, and her brow shot up. Looking at Leon, her eyes turned a deeper black. Something about the situation felt off. She did not find a single trace of spirit magic. Leon had not been manipulated at all. Then, did he lie? Looking at Leon, Delilah didn't feel like his actions were fake. She was quite good at determining someone's thoughts through her observational skills, and she could tell he wasn't lying. Then, all looked deeper. Delilah closed her eyes and sank deeper into Leon's mind. While others couldn't afford to do it due to the risks it brought to the one being checked, Delilah was no regular person. As such, she delved deeper into Leon's mind, trying to see what had brought his memory loss. Thankfully, it didn't take long for her to find the foreign power. Though it was extremely thin and stealthy, she managed to find it, and her eyes narrowed. That was because she felt this power was strange. It didn't seem to be anything like spirit magic. In fact, in some ways, it almost felt familiar to her. Why did it feel familiar? Delilah reached closer to the power. The closer she went, the more the familiarity grew, and it wasn't long before her expression changed. Her body shook, and she rapidly opened her eyes, shaking her head. That makes no sense. Leon still had his eyes closed while she retreated. He was probably going to remain like this for the next few minutes. And it was good that way. Because right now, Delilah didn't want to be seen. No, she leaned against the table, her lips quivering. She couldn't make sense of what she had just felt. The reason why she was familiar with the power was because she herself had been the one to help him disguise the relic. She had felt it before when examining it. That was without a doubt the Ring of Nothingness. But how could that be? Only those acknowledged by it could use it. And in that sense, there was only one person in the world who could use it. Delilah's body shook, the cracks she had been trying to hide slowly starting to expand. Could it be 615? The mirror dimension was a treacherous place. The living conditions were almost impossible, with monsters lurking everywhere, and the distant ball of white that scorched everything beneath. And yet, despite the brutal living conditions, civilizations and empires still managed to exist, and even thrive, in this unforgiving world. But naturally, the same brutality that allowed them to rise swiftly also ensured their downfall came just as fast. Virith Anish was different, however. Located at the edge of the Crimson Sea, one of the 7 major seas of the Mirror Dimension, the city was one of the central hubs that connected to the remnant south, where the eclipsed Maw was located. Built even before the era of the Shattered World, the city was as old as they came. A dry, metallic scent lingered over the small city that sat between jagged cliffs and the endless red waters. It was a smell of rust and salt, mixed with the blood of all the beasts and humans that had died in the sea. But of course, that wasn't the primary reason for its red color. That mainly stemmed from the type of algae that rested beneath the water. Ships crafted from dark wood and gleaming mirror glass docked at the harbor, the crimson water lapping against their sides. Nearby, a large bazaar sprawled out, its colorful stalls nestled against faded white marble buildings that seemed to blend seamlessly with the harsh light of the white sun overhead. Buy one, get one free. Purchase from our stall for the freshest and highest quality items. Fresh Orkney meat. Come and get your meat. Come get your rune paper here. We provide fresh rune paper. Freshly sewn clothes over here. The bazaar was lively, with voices screaming continuously as the merchants tried to sell their goods. There was no better place than Virith Anish to sell goods. All looked good on the outside. However, all was not well. A closer look revealed the desperation etched on the faces of some merchants as they peddled their wares. Their pale faces and sweat-slick brows betrayed the tension beneath their forced smiles. 50% off. Buy it now. Buy one, get one free. Purchase one good, you get one for free. 60% off. Their voices grew louder with the passing of time, their faces paling, and the tension on their faces tightening. Come, get your goods. I'm just 100 solas short. So long as anyone can provide me with that much money, you can have anything you wish from the stall. Someone. Despite the cries of some of the merchants, nobody paid close attention to them. Their pleas were a common occurrence within Virith Anish. And then, dong, dong, the deep, resounding toll of a bell echoed through the air, reverberating as the massive black church at the heart of the city trembled with each chime. The merchants despaired, and the windows of several houses closed. Then came the emissaries, cloaked in black, their beaked masks like vultures descending upon the dying. They radiated an aura of dread and fear as they walked through the bazaar. At their helm was a man in a gray robe, his mask matching the others, but his presence was different. An overwhelming aura of pressure radiated from him, making the air around him feel thick. Their steps seemed to drain the very air from the surroundings, and a suffocating silence descended upon the bazaar. The men in black moved from stall to stall, and with each stop, the merchants anxiously handed over sacks that seemed to be filled with gold. The silence carried through with each transaction as the men in black continued to collect payment from each merchant. Everything seemed to be proceeding smoothly, until, "That's not enough," a hoarse voice suddenly echoed, and all eyes fell on the trembling merchant. "No, how could it be? I was, You're missing a total of 75 solas. Ah, let me check. I might have." Trembling, the merchant tried to look around his stall for any change while looking around, a clear look of despair appearing on his face. And then, "Do you have the money?" Okay." Nodding, the men dressed in black moved around the stall, leaving the merchant no room for retreat as his face turned completely pale. "No, wait, give me some time. I will have the money. Just give me some time. I've always paid on time. Please." The merchant's screams pierced the silence of the bazaar as the men in black closed in on him, grabbing him from all sides. Without hesitation, they followed the lead of the figures in gray robes, lifting him and carrying him away. "No, I can pay. His screams continued to pierce through the surroundings, but they were only met with pitiful glances as he was brought away. Such a scene was common in Virith Anish. Anyone who failed to pay the emissaries of the goddess of light, Panthea, was met with such a fate. It was only through her protection that the city was able to remain standing. As such, donations were necessary. Those who couldn't contribute to the city had no reason to remain within the city. "Help, I can pay. Wait, I'm only a few solas shy. Can't you forgive me this once? Please." "No." As the merchants were hauled away, New faces quickly filled their stalls, as if they had been waiting in the wings, prepared in advance. Such was the brutal life of those who lived at the edge of the Crimson Sea. Soon, the emissaries arrived at a particular stall. It was a modest setup, adorned with a white cloth, and several dozen books lay neatly arranged atop it. Amid the chaos, one man sat calmly in a white-clothed stall, a book in hand and a leg casually crossed. With sharp brows, silver-framed glasses, and a composed air, he looked less like a merchant and more like a misplaced nobleman. And as if finally sensing the emissaries, he raised his head, a warm smile tugging at his lips. "Ah, good afternoon," he said warmly. "Interested in a book, perhaps?" Quote. The surroundings turned deathly quiet, whispers suddenly filling the bazaar. "Is he crazy?" Quote. "Did he seriously just say that? Is he looking to die?" Nobody could believe their ears. Was someone so bold as to say something like this? But very quickly, people realized the situation. It looks like he's one of the new merchants who recently took place. He probably wasn't able to reach the quota, and is trying to swindle his way out of the situation. Some smirked upon hearing the voice. Quote. He might as well just give up. Swindling the emissaries. PFTT. A wave of pitying glances swept through the crowd, all directed at the book merchant. In the long history of Virith Anish, only a rare few had ever managed to elude the grasp of the emissaries, and those few were all legendary figures that now stood at the top of the mirror dimension. How could such a man compete with such figures? "You do not have the money." Breaking the silence was the hoarse voice of the leading emissary, his grey robe fluttering silently as his eyes beneath the mask sharpened. A terrifying pressure suddenly bore down on the surroundings, several red runes manifesting over the mask of the grey-robed emissary. "You were told the rules," he continued. "To come up short is to defy the goddess of light. Her light does not shine on the unworthy." The men in black started to surround the merchant, who remained calm throughout the entire exchange. The tensions escalated from that point. And just as things were starting to turn dangerous, the merchant placed his book down and put on his glasses. That was when his face changed. "What's this?" He had a shocked expression on his face as he looked around. "Emissaries. Oh my." He quickly stood and reached beneath the stall, drawing out a heavy sack of coins. "My sincerest apologies," he said, bowing slightly as he offered the bag to the grey-robed emissary. "I'm terribly nearsighted without these, and I was so immersed in my reading that I didn't see you arrive." The crowd stared in stunned silence. He then pointed toward his glasses. And I can't really see without my glasses, you see. I really do apologize." Quote. Silence filled the space as they heard the merchant's words. Seriously, no one knew how to react. Especially since his words looked extremely convincing. He also provided the money necessary. Plus, who in their right mind would do this just to provoke the emissaries? A mistake. The emissary did not move. He stared at the sack, then at the merchant, silent as death. Then, looking towards the merchant, the runes on his mask started to fade. "Pay an additional 15%, the emissary said coldly. "And the offense will be forgiven." The eyes of a few widened upon hearing the emissary's words. 15%. That was a ridiculous amount. It was already hard for many to get the normal quota, and yet. "Oh, okay, What?" Everyone's eyes widened when they saw the merchant pull out another sack and hand it to the emissary. "I really do apologize for what I did. I do hope that this makes you forgive my actions." Throughout the entire time, the merchant maintained an elegant and refined demeanor, handling everything carefully and neatly. Quote. The emissary stared at the money, seemingly lost in thought. But then, brushing hands against the merchant, he grabbed the money and turned around. "Your crimes have been forgiven. There will not be a next time." "Ah, yes, of course." The merchant lowered his head and apologized yet again. The emissary paused again. "You," his voice softly echoed. "Your name." The merchant looked up, his eyes shining faintly behind the lenses. "Lazarus," he replied softly. "A traveling merchant from afar." And then, with a polite inclination of his head, his lips pulled further up. "Rest assured, such an incident will never happen again. Of that, I promise." 616. A tall black spire stood at the heart of Virith Anish. It stood out amongst the rest of the buildings, standing tallest and overlooking the city that touched the Crimson Sea. It was the temple of the goddess of light. Every evening, the emissaries of the church left to collect payments from the merchants around. Each region of the city had a required quota to meet in order to keep things running. In such a dangerous and unforgiving place, safety was hard to maintain. Especially since the threats that tried to break into the city didn't come from just the monsters. Within the large hall of the temple, several groups had already gathered. They were the emissaries, all coming back from the daily collection period. From among the groups, the team leaders stepped forward, each one marked by their gray clothes. They all handed over the collective payment they received from the merchants outside. 31,305 solas. That just narrowly puts you in first place. One of the collectors raised a brow, their brown robes fluttering slightly, surprise flickering across their pale features. Their gaze shifted to the team leader, and a faint smile curved their lips. Not bad, keep it up. Thank you. Anaz humbly accepted the praise before quietly retreating. This had indeed been one of the better collection days of his career as team leader. And it was all partly thanks to that strange merchant from before. With the additional 15% he had managed to receive from him, he was just barely able to rank at the top. This was a great achievement within the temple. Only team leaders who managed to rank at the top once had the chance to be ranked up to the rank of collectors. By then, he wouldn't have to do this type of dirty work. Anaz had a dream. He aspired to rise as a luminarch, one of the highest positions within the temple, and claim a place upon the seat of Solas. His goal was to spread the doctrine of the goddess across all lands bathed in her light. To him, the goddess was everything. She was the one to pick her up and give her a purpose within this colorless world. He wanted to be her everything. The payment collection period is over. For the teams with the lowest performance, you will be marked down for the time being. Should you fail to meet the quota again, the team leader will be dismissed and replaced. As the head collector's voice rained down, the expression of a few changed beneath the masks as tension rose in the air. Anaz smirked at the sight, slowly turning away and heading away from the temple. As he did, he stripped off his clothes and mask, revealing the face of a pale young man with short brown hair and hollowed cheeks. Every emissary had their identity hidden. Nobody knew what each looked like, and things were kept like this for those in the lower ranks. This was intentionally done to prevent any spies from the other churches from infiltrating the temple through the members. There were severe repercussions for those who had their identities exposed. Anaz blended seamlessly with the people of the city, his steps slow and steady as he headed towards the port. Such was the life of the emissaries. They were no different than regular citizens outside of work, and as he walked out in his regular appearance, Anaz stopped by the port. Splash! The crimson sea roared as its furious tides slammed into the docks, sending waves of blood-red water spilling over the edge. Anaz stood by the edge, just far enough for the water not to reach his shoes as he stared into the distance. Gradually, his brows furrowed and his tongue clicked. They're here. A large shadow appeared over the horizon. Soon, the shadow grew more distinct, clearing up to be a massive ship. The moment the ship appeared, the atmosphere around the port changed. Everyone grew tense, and staring at the distant ship, Anaz remained expressionless, his clothes fluttering silently. Soon, the ship docked at the port, its massive frame casting a large shadow on everything beneath as figures appeared aboard, their smirks all too clear. Hiya, what? Several leapt down from the ship's deck, their drunken laughter and boisterous voices echoing through the air. We finally touched land. It's been a while, ha ha ha. Their appearances were wild, and their eyes were sharp. With one glance, one could tell they were powerful, but even they paled in comparison to the man who descended the ramp with slow and steady steps. His towering frame and broad build radiated an overwhelming presence. With a belly that jutted out and shoulder-length curls clinging to his face, he drew every gaze in the port, the tensions rising. Most glaring was the tattoo on his neck, a red, tattered veil draped over a skull. There was not a single look of goodwill directed his way. Anaz also felt tense, trying his best to avoid their attention. He was just about to back away when he suddenly bumped into someone. What? He turned his head to see a familiar figure standing behind him, his calm expression once again standing out to him. Anaz quietly held his tongue. He couldn't reveal his identity. Hello. The merchant smiled, his gaze warm as he looked at Anaz. I apologize for that. I wasn't careful. Oh, yeah. Anaz nodded and was just about to move away when the merchant leaned his face towards the group in the distance. If you could satiate my curiosity, who are they exactly? You don't know. Anaz looked shocked at first, but then, recalling how this merchant introduced himself, he understood. Even though he didn't want to interact with him, Anaz decided to fill him in on a few things. He did, after all, indirectly help him get first place today. Those are the Crimson Wraiths, one of the 7 Lords of the Crimson Sea. 7 Lords of the Crimson Seas? Quote. Yes, they're the 7 lords that dominate the Crimson Sea. If you wish to cross to the remnant south, then you must go through them. Only a few selected ships are allowed to cross the Crimson Sea. Anaz glanced in the direction of the burly man. That man over there is Silas, Red Veil, Vane, captain of the Crimson Wraiths. Don't be deceived by his appearance. He may look like that, but he's a tier 8 and he's rather famous for his speed and deadly assassination techniques. He's also an illusionist, which means nothing you see from him can be trusted. The same goes for his crew. They're notorious for their brutal, yet frighteningly precise kills. You should never cross paths with them. Quote. That's interesting. Rather than being shocked or even scared, a look of interest flashed across the merchant's features, prompting Anaz to frown. Are you sure you're a merchant? Lazarus turned to face Anaz with a smile, his head tilting slightly. Quote. And what makes you think I'm not? Everything about you. Anaz looked at Lazarus up and down. You look and act like some sort of noble from the outer world. Not only that, but you also don't seem at all fazed by anything. Anaz narrowed his eyes, studying the merchant intently. You ask me why I don't think you're a merchant. This is my reason. Quote. Quote. Lazarus stared at Anaz with a slightly surprised expression. But very soon, his expression turned into one of amusement as his lips pulled up, and he leaned closer, whispering into his ear. Quote. I guess that makes the 2 of us, Mr. Emissary. Wah. The moment the merchant spoke, Anaz snapped his head up, eyes wide with shock. How could he have known? His entire demeanor shifted, tension coiling through him, but before he could react, the merchant took a step back and pressed a finger to his lips. Quote. You don't want to do this here. He nudged his head towards the pirates in the distance, and Anaz's face darkened. Every part of him burned with the urge to seize the merchant, to drag the truth from his lips through whatever means necessary. But with the eyes of dangerous company all around, he clenched his jaw and held himself back. Looks like you do know some self-control. The merchant smiled, finding a box and sitting down as he looked towards the distant group of pirates. Even now, he was still relaxed. So you're saying that in order for me to reach the South Remnant, I will have to somehow find a ship that these 7 lords approve of. Quote. Quote. Anaz didn't answer. He felt that if he talked, he'd be playing right into the merchant's game. Just wait until they leave the port. It seems like you're thinking some useless thoughts. The merchant slowly turned his attention towards Anaz once again. It was also in that moment that Anaz felt a certain pressure he hadn't felt before coming from the merchant, his eyes flickering faintly. However, that flicker only lasted for a brief moment before his smile grew warm. Anaz remained tense, unsure of the situation. For some reason, in that split second when his eyes flickered, he felt the back of his head tingle. As someone who had lived by the edge of death since young, he understood what had just happened. He was mere inches away from dying. This guy is not normal. Anaz quickly grew alarmed, his palms sweating. Quote. I need to report this to the temple. Someone as dangerous as him disguising himself as a merchant. He must have some hidden motives. But as if his thoughts were being read, the merchant laughed, slowly standing up while directing his gaze towards the distant pirates as they entered the city. He placed his hand over the young team leader, patting him twice. There's no use thinking about useless thoughts. I've been observing you for quite some time. I know quite a bit about you. Wah, you work for the Temple of the Goddess of Light as a team leader. You were only recently promoted, and now you have the ambition to rise to the Luminarch position. You are an orphan with no family, and the church took you in when you were young. Anaz's pupils dilated upon hearing his words. How did he know? Most of the information was not something that anyone could simply figure out. How was this possible? The merchant laughed once again, patting Anaz on the shoulder. You check out all the boxes. Careful, cunning and knowledgeable. He nodded with a satisfied expression as he looked at Anaz. The moment you took money from me was the moment you started working for me. Yes. The merchant patted Anaz again, his voice warm. Quote. You are now my assistant. 617. Assistant. Working for you. Anaz looked at the merchant, stunned, his expression a mix of confusion and bafflement. And then, as he properly registered the situation, his face changed, and his voice raised. How ridiculous. What sort of nonsense are you spouting? The disdain in Anaz's face became all too clear. How could he not be baffled? Some random merchant he knew nothing about had appeared out of nowhere and declared him an assistant. As if that made any sense. This guy, he was a total lunatic. I can't gauge your strength, but I don't think you're anywhere near as strong as the 7 lords. It's also nothing compared to the temple. Why would I work for someone like you? What can you even provide me? I can Ayaz. At the rate that you're progressing, you'll be stuck in your rank for a very long time. Lazarus suddenly cut Anaz off, his calm voice echoing quietly as he pulled his hand away from Anaz's shoulder and sat back down on the wooden box by the pier. The merchant casually glanced at the sea. Like I said before, I know quite a bit about you. I've been closely watching you for some time, and found enough information to know your current position. What sort of? You've only recently been promoted to the team leader rank. The average time that someone remains stuck in such a rank is about 5 years. If you do exceptionally well, you'll be promoted in 2 years. Anaz was speechless. He couldn't find any words to argue back. No, but most importantly, how did he know so much? This information wasn't something that just anyone could know. What happens once you get promoted? You'll become a collector. How long do you think it will take for you to rank up to become a luminarch? Anaz felt his lips become dry. The ranks for the temple were as such: acolyte, emissary, team leader, collector, clergy, high clergy, luminarch, solarch, and radiant hierophant are best known as the living saint. To rank up from collector to clergy doesn't just take merit. You need to display abilities befitting such a rank. With a casual glance in Anaz's direction, the merchant shook his head. At your current tier 4 rank, there's simply no way for you to rank up to become a clergy. You'll need to develop a domain at the very least. Wait, how do you? Anaz's eyes widened when he saw the merchant see through his strength with just a glance. However, before he could say anything more, Lazarus raised his hand and stopped him. It doesn't matter how I know. The only thing you need to know is that I can help you. What? Help? Anaz's lips opened and closed as he struggled to find the right words. How could someone like him? Seeing his struggle, the merchant from afar smiled. Did I not say it before? I'm a merchant who comes from very far. I do have quite a few things that might come in handy for you. Who knows? He shrugged, closely looking at Anaz. I might even be able to help you develop a domain. Hiss. Anaz drew a cold breath upon hearing the merchant's words. Develop a domain, as if such a thing were easy. Especially in this treacherous place where everyone thought about their own benefit. For years, Anaz had been stuck in the same rank, unable to develop a domain. This was something that nearly everyone struggled to develop. In fact, almost 90% of people remained stuck in the 4th tier, never capable of developing a domain. To most people, the 5th tier was the wall that separated the normal people from the talented. If there really was an item that could help him develop a domain, then there wouldn't be so many people stuck at such a level. Anaz didn't buy his words. But, what if? There was always that, what if, that lingered at the back of his mind. Anaz took a deep breath, calming his thoughts down. Though he was tempted to accept the offer, he still wanted to figure out what the motives behind the merchant were. There was no such thing as a free lunch. What exactly do you need from me? The merchant smiled at the question. Seems like I've managed to tempt you a little. Speak. Don't waste my time. Well, it's nothing much. The merchant crossed his legs while staring at the crimson sea before pointing towards the distance. Anaz cocked his head in confusion. He wanted the sea. Remnant Sioux. That's impossible. Anaz immediately cut Lazarus off before he could finish his words. He didn't need to listen to his voice to understand what his goal was. He wanted to go to the Remnant South. The land where the eclipsed Ma was. If your goal is to go to the Remnant South, I suggest you give up on the idea. Like I said before, the Crimson Sea is closely monitored by the 7 lords. Getting past them needs special boats, and such boats only come once every several months. The most recent boat just left. And even if it was here, getting a place on the boat is impossible. The Remnant South was an extremely dangerous place. It was where the eclipsed Ma was located, and it was filled with all sorts of monsters. However, just as dangerous as the place was, it was also filled with opportunities. It was filled with all sorts of resources, and it was for this reason that the 7 lords prevented passage. They wanted to monopolize the resources for themselves. Each one of the lords is a monster of the 8th tier, with hundreds, if not thousands, of crew members by their side. Trying to get to the Remnant South without their approval is like asking to get yourself killed. But that wasn't the scariest part. Even if you're strong, let's say tier 9, you'd still most likely lose. Not only do you need to take into account the number of crew members helping the lords, but you also need to take into account the environment. You're not fighting on land. You'll immediately be put at a disadvantage. There was a reason why nobody had been able to overthrow the 7 lords. Not only were they strong, but even if someone stronger showed up, in the water, they were nearly invincible. There had been several instances in the past where a tier 9 had tried taking on one of the 7 lords, only for them to lose miserably. It was such events that made everyone give up on the notion of fighting them. If your plan is to, don't worry about that. In spite of Anas' warnings, the merchant remained calm, the same warm smile tugging at his lips as he stared at the distant Crimson Sea. I was aware of the circumstances from the start. Then, then, nothing. He slowly turned his attention towards Anas. I'll still stick to my plan, and you're coming with me. Me? What? Like I said before, the moment you took money from me was the moment you became my assistant. I'll make sure you work your worth. You're crazy. Anas' voice rose, but the merchant ignored him and stood up, gently patting his clothes clean before turning around and moving towards the bazaar. Wait, where are you going? I told you, I'm not. You said the same thing the last time. Don't worry about that, I'll come find you when the time comes, my assistant. Huh, last time, when did he? Oh, and don't even think about reporting me to the temple. This conversation we're having, it's not exactly the first. What? Wait, what do you mean? The merchant's finger pressed casually against his temple, his back to Anas as he began walking away, his figure slowly melting into the crowd. Even as he disappeared, his voice lingered in Anas' ears, sharp and unsettling. I'm capable of so much more than you think. I also know a lot. Things that you personally aren't even aware of, haha. It'd be best if you kept your mouth sealed unless you want all your hard work to go in vain. These were the last words Anas heard before he disappeared completely. Anas could only remain standing on the spot, his face frozen as his mouth opened and closed. What did? Hewerk. I stopped inside a deserted alley within the city, pressing my hand against the side of the wall as my stomach lurched. A silver string flowed down from my mouth as my entire body shook. Shit. I stared at my trembling arm, my mouth pressing tightly. This is taking a bigger toll on me than I originally expected. Rustle tilde. A sudden rustling echoed in the midst of my situation. Looking up, a black owl appeared not far from me. Are you okay, human? I can manage, I replied while forcing myself to stand upright and forcing myself back into my facade. But the moment I did, my stomach twisted again. This couldn't be helped. It was a reaction that came from my mind directly. It was rejecting what I was trying to do. But I had to do it regardless of whether I wanted to or not. This was the only way for me to reach the 5th level of emotive magic. Yes, this is all for that. I was not the same person as before. I no longer had the ability to spam the first leaf or the second leaf in order to improve my emotive magic. And even if I was capable, I knew that it wasn't enough for me to reach the 5th level. The 5th level was fundamentally different. The slow growth became painfully apparent to me. And that was when I realized. To reach the 5th level, I needed to do something different. I needed to be different. I couldn't stay as Julian or Emmett anymore. I had already experienced all there was to experience as them. To reach the 5th level, I needed to become someone else. To experience things from a different perspective. And as such, I became Lazarus. An elegant merchant from afar. But, who would have thought things would be this problematic? In order to experience things as someone else, I had to become them. I had to fully immerse myself in the persona, making myself forget all about what I once was. It was hard, and my body was rejecting it. But even so, I have to do it. In order to improve my emotive magic, this was a must, and as such, closing my eyes and taking a deep breath, I brushed my hair back and calmed down. This wasn't the first time I had done something like this. Perhaps, all that acting in the past had been a foreshadowing of what was to come. Opening my eyes again, my lips slowly curled. I immersed myself once more. 618. Look my way, help me, it's burning, I can't shake away the paint. The mirror tunes echoed silently in the air, their voices drifting in and out of my mind as I focused on immersing myself into the character. I had just managed to do so when the tunes played again in my mind. Why is this happening to me? Where is this place? Unlike the tunes I was accustomed to near the academy or the safe zones near the empires, the tunes in this place were a lot louder. It almost felt as though they were screaming inside my mind. I wanted to make them stop. They were disrupting my concentration and making things harder for me. Walking out of the alley and moving past one of the windows, I caught sight of my own reflection staring back at me and then blinking. But I didn't blink. I know because I had purposely tried not to blink. Soon my reflection smiled, and I looked away. I drew a deep breath. This wasn't my imagination. What I saw was real, and it wasn't because Julian had suddenly broken out of the seal that I had placed with the mirror. Far from it. This place. It was a lot more treacherous than originally anticipated. Everything about the city, people, and mirror dimension felt incredibly eerie. I could see why people would go crazy if they stayed in this place for long enough. I also wanted to leave, but I had a goal and a mission. Until I fulfilled my mission, I could only stay here. This should be the place. I stopped before a fairly sized building, not far from the bazaar, as a large glass window displayed a large room behind. The place was currently empty, but not for long, as I turned my head to see a chubby man with a mustache slowly make their way in my direction. He had a general greasy look to him that made me want to stay away. My apologies. You must be the buyer. The man dabbed his sweaty forehead with a clean white tissue. I was tending to another customer just now. I apologize if I couldn't make it quickly. That is all right. I've also just made it here myself. The language they spoke here was called Virith, and it was considered the universal language around these parts. Of course, because everyone came from all over the place, it was hard for everyone to speak the same language. It was the same for me. Thankfully, there were relics and devices that had the ability to translate languages smoothly. It was also for that reason that the empires never struggled to communicate. Of course, English was also included, although from what I understood, most English records were gone, and could only be sparingly found in the mirror dimension. I wonder why they don't speak English here. It was an interesting thought, but there were more pressing matters at hand. I raised my head to look at the empty place before me. How much were you saying you'd rent this for? The price is about 3,500 solas per day. We do not offer any lower prices. Do you still wish to rent 3,500 solas? Talk about daylight robbery. Solas was the currency used in the city and the regions under the jurisdiction of the goddess of light. The exchange between solas and rend was about 1 to 10, meaning that 3,500 solas was equal to about 35,000 rend. Just thinking about it pissed me off. However, these were the prices over here. And it wasn't as though it was too much for me. Before leaving for this place, I had made preparations in advance, storing a lot of things inside the ring. Noel had also told me in advance about the things that would sell well here, and with that, I was able to bring enough items to open up a merchant house. Which was what I was about to do. Will you take it? Yes. Sweet. The chubby man rubbed his hands and smiled. He then proceeded to take out a piece of paper from his pocket and started to fill in some details. For how long will you be renting this place? A week. A week. Okay. The man jotted down all the information. Is this individual work, or are you going to work as a commercial group? Commercial group. A merchant group, to be exact. Oh, what group? Grey Chamber Merchant Group. Understood. The man continued to jot down several things on the paper, asking several questions along the way before finally handing the paper to me. All details have been filled out. The goddess of light shall bear witness to our transaction. How do you wish to pay? I'll pay right here. I retrieved a fairly sized pouch and handed it to the chubby man, who took it with delight. He opened the bag and started counting the money. It's all there. Just have to make sure. I shook my head and turned my attention back towards the store. Staring at the empty frame of the place, I quietly sighed. This was quite a big investment. However, it was a necessary investment. This store was key to my plan to get to the remnant south. For that reason, this price was nothing. Furthermore, I was confident that I would make all the money back in no time. Yes, it is all there. Very well, I wish you a pleasant stay. The chubby man left shortly after. I didn't even bother bidding him farewell and just focused my attention on the store. After a while, I quietly moved in and looked around the place. With another sigh, I shook my head. This might take longer than I expected. Thankfully, I wasn't alone. It's time I get my assistant to work. Haven. About 4 months had passed since the events. It was now the start of the third year. The number of cadets that entered the academy had reduced significantly as a result of the incident with the mirror crack, and a few other events that had made the news. This was a source of trouble for the academy since its prestigious reputation was starting to decline, with several other academies starting to make a rise. This naturally brought quite a bit of panic amongst the elders of the academy, bringing up the topic in discussion with the chancellor several times. However, "Oh, yeah, okay, do as you wish." The chancellor seemed wholly unmoved by the entire ordeal. In fact, it almost felt like she didn't care about the situation at all. But this was something big. If the academy fell down the rankings, then it would reduce the money that came through sponsorship significantly. This would be a massive blow to the academy since the maintenance costs were extremely high. Chancellor, you must listen to us. We need to do something about this situation quickly. Otherwise, we might be in some serious trouble. Oh, sitting at the edge of a large oval table, Delilah casually glanced at the elders. Her dark pupils scanned the room before. She leaned back on her chair. Her lack of interest made the elders want to rip their own hair out. The situation was especially bad when taking into consideration the fact that Atlas wasn't present. Ever since Julian's death, he had been on indefinite leave. He was the only voice that could somewhat reason with the chancellor. However, with him gone, the situation was a mess. All the elders could do was discuss things amongst each other. We need to think of a way to make everyone more attracted to the academy. There won't be a summit this year, and even if there is, I don't consider the chances of our academy dominating like in the last event to be very high. The quality of the students this year is significantly lower. Then we should focus more on the second and third years. You're right, they should be our primary focus. The second years are promising, but they still lag behind the third years in terms of talent. That's true, but with Julian gone. Oh, don't even remind me. Professor Chambers muttered, massaging his throbbing head. He was suddenly reminded of a certain incident that happened a few days ago. It was with regards to a year-wide party that said, "Third year lives matter." With the jinx gone, we can live. They, of course, were unaware of what had truly happened to Julian. However, the real trouble came from the moment Leon, Kira, Aoife, Kalian, Evelyn, and several of the top rankers in the year found out about the party. All hell broke loose. Chairs were thrown, tables were thrown, cadets were thrown. Oh, God, that day, it rained cadets. A PR nightmare. That incident aside, they are now at a stage where they are stronger than even a large quantity of the professors within the academy. With their abilities, they'll without a doubt achieve something great. That's true. The elders nodded. And then, just as everyone was in deep thought, thinking about them, Professor Evanhard, the leading emotive mage within the academy and elder, spoke. But they still need to do their graduation trial, right? Graduation trial. Yes, that's correct. The graduation trial was essentially the test the cadets needed to take in order to graduate. From going into the borders to fight monsters to helping several places that had been hit by bandits or natural disasters, it was an event that was used to elevate the academy's status, and at the same time, display their ability. It was a very important event. What about the graduation trial? Why are you bringing it up? Because this might be the opportunity that we're looking for. What do you? This year, cadets are far stronger and more talented than ever before. I can count over a dozen that are on the same level as the Black Stars of the previous years. Wouldn't it be a waste if we let them do some boring trial? The eyes of the elders suddenly widened. They were finally starting to see the picture. Right, you're right. If it's them, then I'm sure we can have them do something big. This might be able to enhance our reputation again. The eyes of the elders gleamed at the thought. However, pouring cold water was Professor Wallace, his finger lifting his golden spectacles. But how exactly are we going to do that? It's true that they're talented, but what can they do to catch the eyes of the world? The expressions of the few elders tightened upon hearing those words. Indeed, how could they make the trial challenging and rewarding enough to elevate their status? Just as the argument went on a brief stalemate, one of the elders hesitantly spoke. What if we were to send them deep into the mirror dimension? All eyes turned on the elder who spoke. Like send them deep into the mirror dimension. Have them survive inside a red zone for a certain period of time. I mean, the mirror dimension is the direct threat to our world and the reason we train the cadets. Wouldn't this make sense to prove that our teaching works? The room fell silent in that moment, all eyes stunned. Sending them to a red zone to survive. What? Although his words made sense, it was still ridiculous. This was just asking them to die. The elders were just about to reject the idea when a quiet voice suddenly spoke. Let's do that. All eyes suddenly fell on the Chancellor, her listless eyes gone. In their place was a certain gleam as she looked around the room. Quote. I'll personally supervise the event. 619. Quote. Quote. Delilah stared at the wrapper in her hand, her brows knitting faintly. There, neatly tucked inside the wrapper, was her favorite chocolate bar. It was something she couldn't do without. Her addiction, her obsession, and yet, it's tasteless. Taking a small bite of it, her deep eyes turned hollow. She couldn't taste anything. The explosion of sweetness and flavor that she once used to enjoy was suddenly gone. Like that, the one little joy that remained with her was gone. Talk. The chocolate bar fell onto her desk as her face blanked. In the meantime, a small crow appeared from behind her, secretly eyeing the chocolate bar as it cautiously looked in Delilah's direction before moving stealthily towards it. Its beak was just about to reach it when, wham, awk, the crow was suddenly thrown towards the other side of the room as Delilah blinked her eyes. Quote. Oh, she didn't even mean to do that. It was purely out of reflex. But that wasn't the issue at hand. The issue was her sudden inability to taste the second thing she adored the most. She didn't even need to think much to understand the reason for the sudden change. Delilah nibbled her lips, lowering her head to stare at the piece of paper nestled on her desk. Mirror Dimension Expedition. This was the finalized sheet detailing the graduation trial for the third year. The trial was going to take place in exactly 2 months, and in those 2 months, the cadets would be left in a red rank zone for a month or two. The goal was to survive there. Of course, this would be under her supervision. They were precious cadets. With their already bad reputation, they couldn't afford to have any of them die. This was especially so when taking into account that all of them had very important positions. Not just in the Nurs Ansifa Empire but also in other empires. The third years were a diplomatic mess. The fact that this entire expedition needed the approval of the 4 empires was proof of this. But nonetheless, Delilah was going to make this happen. If he truly was alive, then, I'll find him. Normally, she wouldn't be allowed to enter the mirror dimension by herself. Her position was quite important. She was a living weapon. Any action from her would make any empire wary. As such, entering the mirror dimension was a hard task for her, unless it was strictly approved by Central and the Empire. This time, she felt that if she played her cards right, she'd be given access to the mirror dimension. And she was going to make sure it happened. Even if it meant using force. It had to happen. Delilah nibbled her lips again, turning her attention towards the chocolate bar on her desk. Her hand slowly curled into a fist as she retrieved a green book from her drawer. Opening the first page, a glaring title appeared. Julian Kerr's Diary. It was already filled with all sorts of bullet points. Thinking of how he had suddenly left and pretended to be dead. Delilah's hand trembled, and she brought her pen down. She then began to write her curse. Stupid. Of course, one wasn't enough. She wrote another. Bastard. No, too mild. Cheater. That he was. Even though it was a misunderstanding, he was still a cheater. Bastard. Cheater. Stupid. Delilah filled the page with all sorts of curses. She went on like this for the next 10 minutes, wholly absorbed in this new hobby of hers. It was only during these times that she felt her emotions return. That, she felt alive. And when she was finally done, she looked down at her diary. Her face changed subtly after. When, that was because she realized something. Somewhere in the middle, the curses changed into something else. And when she looked at the diary, all she saw were the same 3 words. I miss him. Delilah dropped her pen and looked away, her blank gaze focusing on the window of her office. Staring towards the blue sky above, her obsidian eyes flickered. If he really was alive. No, he was alive. She was now certain of it. The ring was perfect proof of that. Delilah's fist clenched tightly. Quote. Just see. At the same time, Virith Anish. Within a certain shop, a calm voice echoed as several people moved furniture around the shop. Yes, you may move that there. That's. Quote. Lazarus stopped mid-sentence. Frowning, he looked around. For some reason, he suddenly started to feel chills. Was someone targeting him? Lazarus calmly looked around his surroundings, but found nothing out of the ordinary. In the end, he shrugged and forgot all about it. This wasn't the first time he had felt like this in the mirror dimension, where voices whispered in the air. Even now, he could still hear them. But Lazarus was able to ignore the voices without a problem. He was slowly starting to get accustomed to them. Still, there was something unsettling about the voices. The more he interacted with them, the more he felt them try to crawl into his mind. It was almost as if they were trying to take over his mind. If not for his high mental strength, Lazarus would have been put in a very dangerous situation. Clank! All of a sudden, the door to the shop opened, and an all too familiar figure entered. Lazarus smiled as Anaz came into the shop. "Ah, looks like you had no trouble finding your way here. Welcome." He looked happy to see Anaz as he greeted him with a warm smile. On the other hand, Anaz was anything but pleased. He didn't originally want to come. However, thinking about the previous conversation, he grew paranoid. He knew just how strict those of the temple were. If he had truly leaked anything to them, then his dream of being a Luminarch would shatter before he could even take a step towards it. He couldn't allow that to happen. He had to become a Luminarch. This was something that he couldn't compromise on. It was the very reason why he lived. The goddess was his everything. "It's a good thing that you've arrived. Things were getting quite hectic. Here you go." Bringing Anaz out of his thoughts, Lazarus shoved a box into his hands. It was rather heavy. "Wait, why are you? I'm going to take a walk now. I've been working since early in the morning. I trust you can take care of things while I'm gone." Anaz stood blankly, his mind lost. Then, staring at the merchant who suddenly turned away and walked towards the door, Anaz snapped out of it and tried to call for him. Wait, but it was too late. By the time Anaz snapped out of it, Lazarus was gone, his figure blending in with the people of the city. "Shit," Anaz cursed, his expression contorting. To make matters worse, just as he turned around to look at the shop again, he was met with several workers looking in his direction. "Where should I put this? Is this okay?" Anaz wanted to rip his hair out in that moment. However, taking a couple of seconds to calm himself down, he started giving out some orders. "Yes, that's okay. Keep it there. That's fine." Thinking about it, this situation, it wasn't bad at all. Now that he was inside the shop without the merchant present, he could take his time to carefully analyze his goods to determine some clues about the merchant. However, a few seconds into his investigation, his expression changed. Staring at the numerous goods that were within the many boxes around the shop, Anaz felt a lump form in his throat. How could this? From bones that seemed to come from all sorts of monsters, to finely woven cloths, rich and fresh ingredients, books, and relics. Anaz felt his mind go blank upon seeing the goods that were present within each box. If he had to make a total estimate of the worth within each box, he'd find that not even the temple within the city would be able to possess such wealth. Anaz felt his entire body shudder as he looked around, his eyes narrowing as he looked towards the workers. If he could see the items, then so could they. What if they wanted to take them? However, contrary to his expectations, the workers didn't even seem to be at all attracted by the items. No, it was more like they couldn't see them at all. What sort of situation was this? Anaz covered his mouth. He felt the situation to be a lot more complicated than he had originally expected. Staring at the boxes, he felt a twitch in his body. He was tempted to take the items and run away. However, he was rational enough to understand that such action would only lead to his death. No simple person would be able to bring such goods here. In spite of his background, Anaz was actually quite intelligent. The only reason he had managed to survive this far was because of it. Not luck, not strength, not even charm. Just his mind. He'd learned to read patterns in people, to smell lies the way others sniffed out wine. He could remember details like a sort of photographic machine. And right now, every instinct in that calculating brain of his told him, this is dangerous. Not in the obvious way. Not the kind that came with monsters or assassins, ready to snatch his head off at any given second. No, this was quieter. Like a chessboard already set, and he'd arrived mid-game. It's obvious that once these goods hit the market, they'll attract the attention of a lot of bigwigs within the city. Taking into consideration that he wants to go to the South Remnant, could this be his goal? Did he want to use all of the fame and attraction that his store would bring in order to get one of the 7 lords to accompany him to the Remnant South? No, I don't think it's that simple. Anaz shuddered the more he thought about the situation. He could feel it in every part of his bones. Something big was going to happen. 620. Have you heard about the most recent shop that opened near the bazaar? Which one? Are you talking about the one from the Grey Chamber Merchant Group? That one. Then, of course, I've heard about it. Has anyone not heard about it? Virathanish was alive with activity, and on this particular day, a certain topic dominated the conversations of the city's people. It was about a shop that mysteriously appeared out of nowhere. One that seemed to offer things that hardly anyone had ever seen before. From fine silk items to clothes, relics, and even food. It had everything that one could dream of, all of which was of extremely high quality. As such, word spread, and a massive line appeared on the inconspicuous-looking shop. Make sure to remain in line. Do not cut. If you cut, you will be immediately put on the blacklist and be refused access to the store. Standing at the entrance of the store was a worn-out Anaz. While he had originally anticipated the store to become popular once it opened, he didn't expect it to be this popular. It was beyond anything that he could have ever imagined, and seeing the long line he could see no end of, he felt his stomach flip. Why am I even doing this? He was playing right into that merchant's hands by doing this. Not only that, he was also not getting paid. And yet, it wasn't as though he could leave as he wished. Anaz had no choice but to remain close to the merchant. He was afraid he'd spill something, ruining his chances of ever becoming a luminarch. As such, even though he didn't want to do this job, he had no choice but to. There's no need to be restless. Line up properly, there's enough goods for everyone. In the midst of his shouts, Anaz suddenly noticed several figures approaching in the distance, and his lips paused. He wasn't the only one to react, as the long line of people gracefully moved out of the way, granting passage to a tall yet rather heavy man who was accompanied by several menacing-looking people, arrogantly walking forward. Anaz felt his entire body freeze at the sight of the people before him. It was the Crimson Wraiths. At the helm was none other than their captain. Silas, Red Veil, Vane. Is this the place? Coming to a stop before the store, his deep voice quietly rumbled across the surroundings as Anaz felt his entire body stiffen. He's strong, really strong. Just standing next to him felt extremely suffocating. It should be Captain. Look at the long line. You're right. With a nod, the captain moved into the store, completely dismissing the pale-faced Anaz. Clank. The door swung open to reveal a pristine-looking shop. 2 towering shelves ran along the walls, neatly stocked with all manner of goods. At the center of the room stood a counter with a register, topped by a large sheet of paper. On the paper was a list of all the items that the shop provided. Exclamation mark question mark quote. Oh my god. The moment the members of the Crimson Wraith entered, the customers within the store panicked. It took less than a second for them to drop whatever item they were holding and make a run for it. The captain smiled at the sight. This was going to save him a lot of trouble. He calmly walked towards the nearest shelf, scanning the items on display. He had only just laid his eyes on the first item when his brow rose. This is. He extended his hand and pinched the cloth in front of him. Just one touch and he was able to feel the smooth yet delicate texture of the finely colored cloth before him. Not only that, turning his head, he saw all sorts of goods he had never seen before. There was also a small plate of tasting items, and when the captain tasted one of the items on the tasting board, his eyes couldn't help but show certain glints. It's delicious. He didn't bother with any courtesies and finished all of the items to taste. Wow, Captain, look at this. It's amazing. Oh my god, can't you feel the texture of this? I've never felt something like this before. The captain wasn't the only one to show surprise and delight at the presented items. The other pirates also showed similar reactions as they found themselves unable to hide their excitement. Looking at them, Silas slowly turned his attention towards the counter. Or more specifically, towards the man sitting behind the counter, his head slightly lowered as he calmly read a book. As if sensing his gaze, the man adjusted his glasses before turning his attention towards Silas and smiling. His lips parted, and a charming voice flowed out of his lips. I take it that you're satisfied with the items provided by our shop. Is there anything that I can do to help you? Yes, actually. Silas moved closer towards the merchant and pressed his hand against the counter. The atmosphere within the room grew tense the moment he did so, and as he looked around the place, he laid his gaze on the merchant once more. The goods over here, where did you get them? Though his words seemed more like a simple question, the moment they left his lips, the already tense atmosphere turned frigid. It was enough to make anyone freeze on the spot. And yet, the merchant laughed. Yes, he laughed. This brought the atmosphere to a standstill. Was he really laughing? Was he not aware of who exactly was standing before him? Oh, I apologize for that. Raising his hand, the merchant apologized before settling his book down. I didn't mean to laugh. It was just the way you were talking about the items and acting. It almost made it seem like you wanted to take them all for yourself. Quote. Silas's eyes narrowed as he stared at the merchant. On any normal occasion, if someone spoke to him like that, he'd have killed them in an instant. However, something about the merchant's calm gaze and voice made him hesitant. But that wasn't all. He could also tell that the items present weren't ordinary. He could tell that they came from afar. Perhaps, the land outside. However, the distance between the land outside and Virathanish was extremely far. To be able to bring so many goods over, it surely wasn't something that just anyone could do. These thoughts were the only things that were keeping him in check. He wasn't just here for the goods. He was here to learn more about this mysterious merchant. A smile soon marred Silas's features. Is that so? I guess I may come off like that given the way I look. Well, you certainly do look quite intimidating. Ha ha ha. Silas's boisterous laugh echoed throughout the room as he looked around and grabbed a chair, placing it near the counter and sitting down while staring straight at the merchant. You still haven't answered my question. Where did you manage to get these items from? I can see that they aren't ordinary. The merchant merely smiled and shook his head. That's a trade secret. Trade secret. Silas was just about to frown when he stopped himself. Very well, everyone must have their own secrets. If you don't wish to tell me, that is okay. Quote. I appreciate your understanding. It's nothing. Silas dismissively waved his hand. Then, looking around the place, he asked. How much for all the goods here? Everything. 30 million solas give or take. Silas's entire body stiffened. 30 million? What sort of ridiculous number was this? Taking into consideration all of the items that were offered, while he could see them being worth a lot, none of them were truly of any use. Silently clenching his fist, Silas tried to maintain a smile as he looked at the merchant. You can't lower the price. Quote. It cannot be done. I see. Silas gradually stood up from his seat, his tall frame casting a shadow over the calm merchant. Just by standing, he emitted an extremely powerful and vicious pressure. And yet, it still did not arouse any reaction from the merchant. This made Silas close his eyes and nod his head. Very well then. He twirled his finger in the air. Quote. I'll take everything. The merchant's smile grew then. Very well, then. He stood up and looked around the room. Do you wish to pay now? The most I can wait is a day before waiting for the payment. In the meantime, I'll need you to give me a down payment in case you do not fulfill the end of your deal. This is so that I don't make a loss on the rent. Silas's mouth twitched upon hearing the merchant speak. He was truly a merchant through and through. He quietly pretended to nod to his every demand before extending his hand towards the merchant. I understand. I'll comply with everything that you've mentioned. I hope for a happy cooperation. The merchant paused, lowering his head to stare at Silas's hand. For a split second, the smile faded from his face. But it was only for a split second. Enough to make anyone doubt whether they had seen things or not. The same was for Silas, who licked his lips. Don't tell me he noticed something. His brows furrowed, and just as he was about to say something, the merchant brought his hand forward and grasped his hand. To a happy cooperation, and so, an agreement was struck. Within the following day, Silas was to deliver 30 million solas to the merchant. Failure to do so would nullify the deal, and he would forfeit a deposit of 100,000 solas. Clank. Coming out of the store, under the gaze of all the people present, Silas slowly moved away. It was only when he was far away enough that his crew members rushed towards him. Captain, why did you agree to the deal? Why are you spending so much money on goods like that? Isn't it a waste? Captain, they were clearly distressed by the transaction, and Silas couldn't blame them. This was a lot of money, and they usually took money, never gave it away. He quickly raised his hand to stop them from speaking. Don't worry, I'm not interested at all in buying that crap. You're not? Then, I just wanted to check something. Silas lowered his head to stare at his hand, his lips slowly pulling up. I think I found him, the last ingredient to his ascension. Moments after Silas left, Anaz quietly slipped into the store, his face stiff as he looked around. Eventually, seeing the merchant completely unharmed, his expression grew grave. He was able to survive. Anaz was just about to call for the strange merchant when he suddenly stopped. No, rather than stop, it was more like he couldn't move at all. His pupils suddenly trembled, and just as he was about to open his lips, he saw the merchant turn his head, their eyes meeting. It was in that moment that Anaz saw it. The emptiness. He saw the emptiness in his gaze. In that moment, he seemed like a doll. A doll without personality. What sort of